Hello everyone, thanks for coming outside with me today. Today we're talking buying used equipment, in particular a used compound bow, what you should be looking for whether you're doing an online purchase or in a face-to-face interaction. Before you start shopping around, you need to first understand what type of draw length you have and how much draw weight you want to pursue. So if you want to shoot 50 to 60, you can only look at 50 to 60 pound bows. Do you have a short draw? Do you have a long draw? Longer draw shooters typically like a longer axle to axle bow, usually 32 inches and up, and sometimes shorter draw archers like that shorter side under 32 inches, closer down even to 28. Now every archer is a little bit different, but that's a good place to start. The second thing you want to understand is, do you have the ability to work on this bow by yourself, or are you going to have to take it to a shop? Some bows are a lot easier to work on at home than others, and that's a very important piece of research you have to take before you start shopping around. You might get a really good bow at a really good deal, but it takes a lot of work at a pro shop with a bow press or changing modules and all that sort of stuff. And if it's something that you could have easily done at home with a bow that has a rotating mod and other easier things to tune, then you'd be up the creek without a paddle buying that really nice setup, but you can't really do a whole lot of work at it at home. So that's a very important piece of research that you must do before you start looking for things to buy. So finally, once you have the U part of the bow figured out, now you must figure out your budget. For me, if I'm buying used equipment in a whole package deal, I don't want to spend more than $800 total. Now everybody else's budget is different. It might be $200, it might be $1,200, but either way you need to pick that budget and stick to it. It'll really help you in this process. You always can find a bow that's just above your budget that you just might want to try, but it's a lot harder to find a bow that's on a really good deal that's below your budget. So that's something you really want to pick, stick to it, and then ask people around you. Ask your fellow buddies who are bow hunters, ask your local pro shop, what are the going sales of things these days? How, again, easily are they to work on after they've been bought by a second-hand owner? These are all things you want to figure out as part of your budget before you go and buy it outright. So to break down that $800 number a little bit more, I spend somewhere between $350 to $500 for bare bow. That means there's no accessories, there's no stabilizers, rest, quiver, sights, nothing. It's just the bow and strings itself, $350 to $500. For the arrows, I spend anywhere between $65 to $100 a dozen, usually depending on the grade and the type of arrow that I want to get. If I'm doing target shooting, those are typically a little bit more, but if I'm just flinging arrows in the yard or taking them out for bow hunting season, I can usually get away with close to that $65 to $80 range. Now when it comes to the accessories outside of the rest, like your sight, your quiver, your release, and that sort of stuff, those things I like to spend no more than $200 on, and they can add up in a hurry. So maybe it involves getting a cheaper quiver and a more expensive release, or a better sight and cheaper other components. Whatever it is, I don't want that number to be over 200. And finally, what I think is probably the most important accessory, and that is a rest. I like to have a nice, really well-built, high-tolerance rest. My personal preference is a Hamskea drop away, and there's also good ones like QAD and Vapor Trail, but again, those are all well over $100, and I don't like spending cheap money on a rest. This rest is going to control the arrow, every single arrow that you shoot, and I like to have a nice high-quality machine part there because it's doing a lot of the work. Now, if you're doing some quick math there, $500 for a bare bow at the top end, $100 for the top end of arrows, $200 for the top end of the sight, quiver, and release, and then $150 for the rest, you know that's $950. So what kind of money am I going to have to shave off to get from that high end of $950 down closer to that $800? Am I going to have to buy that cheaper sight, maybe that cheaper rest? I go with like a whisker biscuit instead of a drop away. That's up to you and what you are willing to work with and what you're willing to buy. Now, you can go up to $950, but now you're talking the price of a flagship bow by itself. And do I rather want to buy a flagship bow and have my name and a full warranty to it, or a secondhand bow with no warranty? It's kind of an odd you have to weigh. Now, an additional purchase you're going to have to really think about, depending on how honest the seller is with you, is the string and cables. Those things are the first to go. They're just like the oil in your car. You're going to have to change it every so 1,000 miles, or in the case of a bow and arrow, every few thousand shots. So in my mind, when I've always bought used equipment, I automatically think I'm probably going to be spending upwards of $100 to replace the string and cables. Now, I have the ability to do it myself, so I can get cheaper string and cables cables and put them on my bow and save a few bucks. But if you don't own a bow press, you're kind of up the creek without a paddle, and you're going to have to take it to your pro shop, and that's probably going to run you about 3 figures. Another thing you're definitely going to want to think about that could cost you anywhere between 25 and 50 bucks is draw modules. Not all bows come with a rotating draw module where every draw length adjustment on the cam is right there. A lot of manufacturers, and particularly up until about 2017, 2018, have modules that you have to replace on the bow from a pro shop or buying them online somewhere. And that's another thing. Now, some manufacturers require them to be pressed before you take the modules off, and others you can just do at home. That's a piece of research and another piece of money you're going to have to be aware of. All right, so now you've done all your research, you've figured out your budget, you know exactly how much you want to spend, and let's say I was going to buy this bow, which of course is mine. This is a Victory 39 from Elite. It's already set in my draw length, so I don't have to include that mod, but I would have to think about it if I didn't. It's coming bare, except for maybe, let's say, this stabilizer the previous owner wants to throw in there. There's no rest, there's no sight, no quiver, no release, just the D-loop and the peep that comes on the bow. So let's say this was an online sale through eBay or Archery Talk, or maybe from a social media platform. What are the things that I want to ask the seller about when it comes to me purchasing this bow? Well, the first thing I want to ask is, are you the original owner? People who are usually the original owners that want to sell a bow like this is a flagship level bow, they usually take pretty good care of it. But if they're the second or third owner, now you can start to ask some questions about what this bow's history is, and they might not even know. Second question I asked the owners, what did they use the bow for? Did they use it for indoor archery? Did they use it for hunting? Now, of course, this is a long axle-to-axle bow. It is meant for the target world, so I can assume and I can infer that the previous owner probably took pretty good care of it. It saw a lot of a bow case, it saw a lot of indoor shooting, didn't really see the woods. I can expect that the cams to be okay in terms of being bumped off of trees and brush, the limbs to be not as scratched up. I might have some more wear and tear around the interior part of the riser, because this would see a lot more arrows than a bow hunting bow would, just because of the amount of arrows you shoot in target archery. But I can make the inference that it would see a little bit less wear and tear than if it was bumping around the bed of a truck heading out to a whitetail tree stand. But I never want to take anything for granted. So in an online sale, if the seller is ready and willing, I always ask for as many pictures as possible, and particularly of any blemishes that they are willing to agree that are already on the bow. And this, of course, you have this kind of weird interim where they want to tell you everything, but not too much. And if you get a seller that's super honest and super open about what's going on with the bow, if they nicked a cam, if they bumped a limb and there's a dent in it, that's a really good thing. You want them to take pictures of it. Hopefully they're as honest as possible, but I want as many pictures as possible of all the limb faces, of all the faces of the cam, both from the bottom, from the top, and both sides. I want pictures of the cable slide or the roller guard, depending on the bow, as well as the string stop, what the actual condition is of the rubber of the string stop. If there are any nicks and dings on the riser, those are more cosmetic issues. The riser is solid aluminum in the vast majority of cases, and a little scratch and nick here are just cosmetic. They're not actually going to affect the performance of the bow, but you might see a lot of wear and tear around the grip, especially for guys that are right-handed archers. We're wearing metal wedding bands. We'll scuff up this inside here. So you want to look over the cosmetics, but also ask them if there's anything detrimental happening to the bow, in particular with the cams, modules, and the limbs. Another thing you want to look at is the seller rating. Now, I buy bows from Archery Talk and from eBay, and they have really good seller rating systems there. If you buy them from a different website or other sort of things, you got to be a little bit more cautious. But usually the people that are selling bows on Archery Talk or eBay, you can look up their ratings of the past, see how good they are with shipping, how good they are with their honesty of the product that they have already sold, and you can make a good judgment call from there. Now, with all those pictures that are taken, the biggest thing that I look for is sign of neglect. Whether this bow was just kind of hung in a garage, left under a dirty, dusty bed in a case, or something like that. I would see a lot of dust and lint collection, and particularly up in the grooves around limb pockets, in the grooves around the modules of the cam, stuff all stuck to the wax that's on the string, up in the tracks of the cam, and hiding up in here under the rockers of the limb pockets. That signs a little bit of neglect. Now, one thing that I don't like to say neglect of is rust on limb pocket bolts and the limb bolt for the limb itself. Some bolts just rust super easy, and in my experience, I've never had a limb bolt that didn't rust unless I took really good care of it. Now, if it's super caked in rust and they haven't made an attempt to clean it, now that is a sign of neglect, and that's something I definitely don't want to see. So now let's talk about meeting face to face, which is obviously way better than just buying it online. I still do all of the online prerequisites, taking pictures, looking up seller ratings if at all possible, but a lot of these sales are going to come from like newspaper ads and local classified websites, sites like Facebook or Let Go, something like that, and you can actually meet them in person. And what I like to do is take a release, take an arrow, and take my target, and I like to shoot it if at all possible. That's going to give me immediate feedback if there's something going wrong with this bow. Of course, I'm also able to look at everything with my own two eyes, check for those rust spots, check for signs of neglect, check the string and cables where they go in and around draw modules and all that sort of stuff. See what kind of money I'm going to have to put in to get this bow back and up shooting correctly for me. So let's say I'm going to sell this bow to myself. I get this bow. The first thing I'm going to look at is string and cables, because those are going to be the first thing that wear and tear. I see that the string and one of the cables here looks okay, but I can see that one of the cables here that wraps around the module is starting to have serving separation. It doesn't look premature, but it definitely shows signs that this bow has been shot and shot a lot. There's a little bit of fuzzing here right above the and below the cable slide, which is to be expected from general wear and tear of the bow. Same thing's going on up here. We have a little bit of serving separation where the bowstring went around the cam module. Now, the cams themselves are in really good condition. This bow looks like it was shot for indoor archery, which it was. The draw stops are there. I don't see any random rust on parts that shouldn't be rusted. There's a little bit of rust, but obviously it was cleaned out of both of the limb bolts. I don't see any flaking of the paint around the limb pockets. I don't see any dust collected in areas that shows sign of neglect, where it's just been kind of left to rot, if you will, then pulled out for hunting season or just for target season. I don't see any nicks or dings in the riser or any cracks or fissures, although those would be incredibly rare. The cable slide itself, the rod, looks to be in really good condition. The rubber of the string stop is also in really good shape, as well as the string dampener on the rod itself. I would say these strings are probably going to need replaced here within the next few months. They don't look dangerously unsafe with the serving separation, but I'm definitely going to have to budget that in when I go to purchase this bow. Now, of course, everybody is worried about dry fire, and if you buy a bow online, there's no way to know if that bow's dry fired. And really, with how robust the limbs of bows of modern compounds are today, it really actually isn't the limbs and the limb pocket we worry about when we get a dry fired bow in the shop. The biggest thing we worry about is the axles that the cams go over, and you can't see if they are warped or if they are bent from a dry fire unless you actually fully disassemble the bow, pop the axle out and remove the cam, and then roll the axle on like a glass table or something and see if it has a wobble to it. So there's a lot of work to go into finding a dry fire, which means it's really easy to hide it. Now, unfortunately, the only other way is if it did limb splinter, and if it did limb splinter, it would happen up where the limb reflexes and deflexes the most, which would be right here. The best way to check for that is to take a cotton ball or a Q-tip, take that cotton ball and run it up and down the limbs on both sides, top and bottom. If you get snags of cotton ball fiber, which I'm not getting any right here, if you get snags of cotton ball fiber, that means you have a chip or a ding or perhaps a splinter in that limb that might be even microscopic that you can't see, and that could potentially show that there was a dry fire or just general sign of wear and tear on a limb. So if you do start pulling up some fuzzies, it's kind of obvious real quick, the look on the other person's face, that you know what you're doing, and they will usually fess up if there was a dry fire instance, and then you can just walk away from that situation, because being that a dry fire is not covered under a manufacturer's warranty to the original owner, and definitely not to you as the second owner, you want to walk away from that situation. Now, the bow could be okay, the axles could have gone unbent, and the limbs could actually be just fine, but quite frankly, I would want to step away from that as quickly as I possibly could. So now you're the proud owner of a used bow or used bow package. Congratulations. I hope hope you enjoy it. I hope you get out and start shooting and really enjoying the sport of archery. So that's all for this video. If you have any questions about buying a used bow or buying any other piece of used archery equipment, follow the links in the description below. Hit me up on Facebook and Instagram. My email's even down there. And of course, you can always leave a comment here on YouTube. Hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful creation, and we'll get to see you next time.